Hello and welcome to today's screencast where we'll be covering HTML5 Audio Custom Controls in XPages and how you would go about creating those. Figured I would walk you through the process on how I go about creating custom controls that I can reuse throughout my applications. I'll start by going into my simple XPages trick application, creating a new custom control, and let's call that HTML Audio. That creates our blank HTML audio custom control. From here, I'll go into the source pane. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is look up the HTML5 audio tag. So HTML audio, you can see I've already looked it up. And let's go with, I believe this is the one that has the more complete, yes, this has all the attributes listed. Where in this first one just quite frankly doesn't. So got to make sure you're at the right URL. So very basic, it's the tag name is audio. It has various attributes and multiple source entries based on supported content type. And you have a default text blob in here that will render if your browser does not support the HTML5 audio tag. The tag will look like this, loading content in. You'll have controls if you opt for that. So let's go and create. Now the first thing we'll do is basically copy this content. It's Pass-Thru HTML. Cleaned it up, format it, to meet our needs. And we're going to take a look at the audio controls or the audio tags properties. And there are multiples to choose from. You have autoplay, controls, loop, preload, and source. And as you can see in the example, you can have multiple source, which is actually a child node of the audio tag. So we'll keep that in mind, and there's a different way that we'll actually build that into the custom control. But all the rest of these are top-level properties, the audio, controls, loop, and preload. So let's set that up, and if we go in, let's keep them alphabetical here. Autoplay, and keep that blank for right now. Controls, loop, preload. Controls, loop, and preload. Now the source we'll get rid of. We know the format we have coming in, and we'll build that out. Now since this is a custom control, and since we can do the rich tags, or we can infuse HTML tags with XPages markup inside of custom control, inside of an XPage. That's exactly what we're going to do here. It's property based, so we'll use expression language, and we'll just say composite data, and let's say autoplay. Controls, we're going to do the same. And the same here. Now when we get down to the source, because you're going to have multiple of them, we're going to want to create a repeat control here. The value is going to be our composite data source, and the var is, let's say, source item. And each of these is going to be a source tag where, and just checking the syntax here, it's source, src is the attribute that defines the actual audio source file. Type defines the actual type. So let's say source equals, and then type equals, and then we'll self-close the tag, make sure that's valid syntax. It is. Excellent. With this, because we're basing it off of the source item, we can use EL again to say source item dot source, keep the tag names consistent, and source item type. Now, the last thing we're going to want, and we're going to want it outside of the repeat source, and that is our HTML that's to be displayed if your browser does not support HTML5 tags. So let's take a look at, we'll just use a text control value. Let's make the style class no HTML5, and we'll give it a theme ID just so we can get a better handle on it should we need to. And then the value, of course, is going to be expression language. I'll go ahead, I'll close that, so get rid of the red lines in the script. We go composite data. Let's call this no HTML5. Pretty basic here. Now, you're not done. We've pre-wired this for the properties as we pass this through, but there's zero properties custom properties that are actually defined for this control. For that, we're going to need to go into, and if you're highlighting any markup, you'll see that the actual properties pane is context sensitive. You're going to need to highlight the XP view of your custom control, and you'll see a property definition down here. This is where you start adding new properties and new group properties. So I'm going to say a new property, and we're going to call this one Autoplay. Pretty basic. It's going to be Autoplay. And let's check the tags to find out what the options are. Okay, the value is either Autoplay or blank. So we can handle this with a toggle. I select the value type as string. I select the editor. I'm actually going to select a combo box here. And for parameters, it's basically what the values are going to be when you select it. So autoplay is the option. We'll say enable autoplay. And we'll say blank because then we don't want it to have a value. Disable autoplay. And take note of the syntax here. It's actually opposite compared to what Notes developers are typically used to, where it's label pipe value. This is value pipe label. And you can see this come through. Now you can set a default value as well. Which one of these you want selected. We're going to leave that blank, which means autoplay will be disabled. In this context, autoplay will be disabled by default. And because there's only one instance allowed per audio tag, we don't have to worry about that. We can also make this a required field, which really wouldn't make sense in this context. So we'll go ahead and we'll disable any required fields. So let's go in and add the rest of our controls. We've got controls. Controls is going to be another combo box, and the syntax is going to be controls or blank. Same idea here. So controls, enable controls, carriage return to get to the new line, pipe, disable controls. No additional value. Let's go for another property. We'll keep this up on screen. I'll actually keep this up on another screen so I can refer to it. But as I'm typing this out, I'm actually just reading right off of the HTML spec. So we have controls. Let's name this one loop. This is going to be another combo box. because it's almost a Boolean, if you will, whether they're enabled or not. So let's say loop is going to be enable looping, or let's say loop audio, and then blank disable looping. You can set whatever values you want as far as the label. You can even compute them if you needed to. So we have loop, preload, now this one, and I'll drag this back into the screen here, preload has 3 values. Auto, metadata, none. We're going to give it a 4th, which is leave it blank, which basically doesn't include that attribute as it comes through. So let's do auto, metadata, and none, none, and then blank disable preload, just to give us the options. And now we're up to source. Now source can be multiple values, as you can see here. This is where it gets a little fun. So we've got this new group option. Let's add a group and let's call this source. We're going to allow multiple instances of the source. And for the property, obviously, we're going to match our naming standards here. So source and type. So source, this is going to be a string, and quite frankly, string editor comes in, string value editor comes in perfect. Now, no multiple values, no default value needed. Let's set the validation for this to be required. Type, you don't necessarily need it to be defined. If you're highlighted on here, you want to add an additional property. Either select the root or you select the source. We're going to add type in here. Going to select the style, string value editor. And I'm not going to set that it's required. You can put that in there as needed. Ideally, you would want that required, however. So let's go back up to the root because we still have to have this no HTML5 property pass through. So let's select that, say no HTML5, no HTML5. Let's set that to be a string value editor. We are going to set this as required because quite frankly, you got to tell them something. And let's set a default value. Now, as you can see right in the example markup here, your browser does not support the audio tag. Just throw that in here. We're not going to need multiple instances of it. And you could further flesh this out by adding a description and start playing around with it. But this is good enough for right now. Also, you'd probably want to create your own design definition so it doesn't just look like this. So let's go in there and I'll show you how to create one real quick. And let's just say div, because it's a block element, that should work. We'll probably want to style that. Now there's no actual editor, so you're just writing raw HTML or XML. So you probably want to do this in its own custom control and then just copy paste it so you get the formatting properly. But let's say let's make this HTML5 Audio Control. And let's just say border is 2px solid. Get a nice thick border. Background color. And let's pick a I'm going to completely steal from modernnl.com's article on the Web 2.0 color palette, their interactive action yellow, just so this pops. So you're not going to see the change here, but when we bring it in, this might look completely ugly, just to be forewarned. It's going to look like this, though, in the control. That really doesn't change. But this is now completely wired. You've created your own custom control, and now to use it. So let's go into I already pre-wrote a page here, demo HTML5 audio, which is just like the video page. Just basically waiting for us to load some different content, but here's the meat of it. Let me open up my audio control. I'll drag that in. And a few things that should jump out to you. First, there's really no other controls except the one which is the required control for the root level. And that's the no HTML5, which we've already set a default. The defaults are going to pre-populate. Now, if I take a look at this in design, boom, it is ugly, but you can tell that it's something that's not core. You can play around with this, make it look really nice, but that's an HTML audio control. Now let's actually populate it. So we'll go in here and say, okay, in the custom properties pane, you've highlighted the custom control. Custom properties pane, you can click on the drop down whether you want to enable or disable audio. If you enable autoplay, it actually sets the value here. So autoplay, and there's your autoplay option. You can disable it as well. And you can see that actually just removes it. Now if you click off of this, because this is blank, that's the actual value, it actually loses the content, which is just as well. You can go in here and you can manipulate the text, the default text, if you will. You can even compute it. And all of these you can compute as well. It's just like a standard control. The source, because it's a group and we allow multiples, we're going to be able to define the first one, your source and your type. Now, for the source, I'm going to completely cheat here and say, okay, we're going to have an audio MP3. So let me copy that first and just throw that into here. And you can see that that actually populates the type attribute on that individual source entry. But for the source, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to open up the latest Taking Notes podcast and copy the value here. You can see when you highlight on the word podcast here, or the image for the podcast, it actually pulls up the URL. So let's copy the link address and actually put that in as a value. See this populates over perfectly. I'll clean up the format, save it. Let me build the project. I'll replicate it over. To my development environment, if you will. And go ahead and just preview this. So I'm going to preview it in my default web browser. Did that not carry over? Aha. So, sorry about that. I had to pause the recording. If you go into the markup, it actually generated the audio tag, and it set the source and the type and the span. So everything looks great. However, we're both not autoplaying this, and we're not giving it controls. So knowing that, let's go back into, and we'll just do this directly on the server. So let's go into our control. Let's set controls. We're going to enable the controls. And again, this just updates, throws the controls in there. Let me save. Run a clean and build just to make sure that I don't have to pause this again. There we go. Bring this back up, refresh. And we've got our player. Now, hopefully you can hear this, so you can see it's actually So you've got your entire control right here, one that you've just created from here. You can compute values. Actually set this up as a feed that you can pull content via notes data, have multiple sources defined. If you need to create another source, just go in here, add another value, and you can see, obviously, that one ain't gonna work, but you get the idea. And it's just gonna generate multiples there. But that's pretty much it. That is how you create a custom control, actually implement it into XPages. We've also covered creating a design definition so it looks different from, quite frankly, a bunch of Pass-Thru HTML as rendered within the design. You can actually see it pops, and you'll want to play around with the design of that and make it pop more. We went over as well. Let's get into the actual XSP view. Property definitions. We went over properties, required properties, group properties, how you can have multiple instances of a property, and how to use them with not only HTML, but expression language and merge those together with the ultra combo markup that the source pane allows you when writing your XPages XML.